morning and a very warm welcome to this IDC webinar on a topic that's rising up on the agenda for a lot of head of engineering, data teams, and cloud teams that we talk to at IDC. And that is, how do we make sure that our data management strategies are up to speed and aligned with our modern application strategy? Just before we get started, a few housekeeping rules. Everyone's familiar with Zoom, but still no harm in repeating. There is a Q&A box. So please make sure that you put your questions in and we will get to those towards the end of this webinar. We'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. But in case we run out of time, we'll make sure that we email you with the responses. So, but please make sure that you keep the questions coming. There's also an evaluation form. It will probably take you a few seconds to get through those. It just helps us to make sure that we bring the right topics to you that help you make progress in your digital strategies. So please answer those questions in the evaluation form. It just helps us improve the webinar quality. So without further ado, let's get started. My name is Archana Venkatraman, and I head up IDC's European Cloud Data Management Research. And looking at this cloud native and modern application strategy and aligning the data management to those strategies is very much a core focus of my research. And it's very interesting because that's what a lot of CIOs we talk to are bringing up in terms of, those are the questions that a lot of the CIOs we talk to are asking. But today I'm not alone, and I'm extremely delighted to welcome my co-host and co-speaker at this webinar, Alex Kirchhoff. Hi, Alex. Welcome to this webinar. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Archana. I'm really excited to be here too. So my name's Alex Kirchhoff. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of OnThat, and we are a cloud-native company providing data services for cloud-native and stateful workloads. And sort of my background is actually in infrastructure engineering, and I worked for some finance companies like Nomura and Goldman Sachs before embarking on this exciting journey. And I kind of have two hats because I'm also the co-chair of the CNCF Storage Technical Advisory Group. So I'm very plugged into the ecosystem and some of the community and the interesting projects that are being developed in this space.
Fantastic. Welcome once again, Alex. And I know we've had so many interesting discussions on this topic, so I'm very much looking forward to having a conversation with you as well along the way.
Same here.
So let's get started. I first want to set the scene of what's happening around this whole digital transformation. We're beginning to see that we have really crossed that digital Rubicon, if you will, where there's just no looking back. We're very much becoming a digital first economy. IDC talks a lot about how more than 65% of GDP will be digitized by 2022, and these products and services will come from digitally transformed organizations. So GDP itself is going to be digitized. And when we look deeper, we are finding that 1 in 2 companies will see that by 2023, 40% of their revenues are actually coming from digital products and services. It could be a very physical product like a boat or crystals, but that whole experience of buying those products and services will be very much digitally wrapped. So a lot more organizations are putting their foot forward in this digital first future. But as they become a digital native enterprise, what are the core tenets that they're trying to develop? The first one, if you look at the right side, the first one is they're really trying to become an intelligent organization, a data-driven organizations where intelligence is embedded across everything that they do. So it's analytics and data is very much at the heart of how they want to be a digitally resilient enterprise. Then they're also fueled a lot by innovation. So software is very much at the heart of what they're beginning to do. They want to fuel innovation by software. They're looking at these big companies like Google's and Netflix's, and they're trying to see how can we emulate that culture, that behavior, that innovation driven through software. So a lot of focus is on software driven innovation, developing applications that are a lot more agile and delivers that digital first experience. And then the third core tenet is about digital resilience. And the pandemic has really been a tipping point. There were initially 2 streams of resilience. You would have an IT resilience, you would have business resilience, but then all that changed during the pandemic, and all the C-suites came together as a task force to create a digitally resilient organizations. And by digital resilience, what we mean is that you're not only able to adapt to uncertain, volatile situations like the pandemic, but you're also so resilient that you're able to pivot quickly and capitalize on the new opportunities that come with volatile and uncertain markets. Like in the pandemic, there was a lot more focus on digital and digital services. So a lot more organizations that were resilient were able to pivot quickly and capitalize on those new opportunities. And the next big factor is companies and CIOs are thinking about how they can become ecosystem centric. How can they coordinate their entire ecosystem rather than just controlling just their own enterprise, because they're beginning to see that by sharing innovation, by sharing data, they're able to innovate a lot more at scale than they would do as an individual enterprise in isolation. So ecosystem-centric play is becoming very important, and they're making a lot more fundamental changes to their technology and platforms to make sure that they are able to coordinate in this ecosystem, and they're able to share data securely and efficiently. And all this is definitely empowered by a modern digital platform. So all these tenets are enabled by a new digital core platform, which is really the bedrock of this future enterprise. This kind of platform is very much technology enabled, but these are new technologies. They are the cloud native technologies, they are next generation security, and they are embedded intelligence. So all those capabilities make that platform digital native to deliver on all the other features such as embedded intelligence or software driven innovation or even resilience. So platform is very much at the heart and center of this all. And this future enterprise objectives are actually getting translated into business priorities. So if you look at business priorities of 2021, what our enterprise resilience survey showed is that a lot more organizations are showing this cautious optimism. They want to invest into technologies and business processes that helps them deliver innovation, increase productivity, deliver more customer satisfaction, operational efficiency. And fewer of them are focused on, business risks and all that. So organizations are moving beyond just keeping the lights on to focusing a lot more on innovation because they want to pivot to this digital future. And if you look at the percentage of technology spend that's reallocated, we're beginning to see how a lot more organizations are spending more towards reigniting and recalibrating their business, and the fewer of them are spending on crisis response, which was a big bucket back in 2020. So companies are cautiously optimistic, and they're using this opportunity as a great one to recalibrate and kind of accelerate the projects that are taken the back seat. So where is all this investment going? We're beginning to see that a lot of technology investments is focused on fundamental building blocks that enable this digital platform, if you will. So companies are spending a lot more on front-facing digital transformation applications. Cloud and cloud native is on top too. And then they're looking at this modern future of work or digital workspace. So enabling that hybrid work is a core investment area, as is modern security. Now, if you look at all these investment areas, what we are beginning to see is that the growth in these areas is much, much faster than the overall infrastructure and communications technology spend, which is expected to grow at 5% compound growth rate to 2024 compared to, say, cloud, which is growing at 22% growth rate. So companies are doing more with the budgets that they have. They are reprioritizing and spending on technologies that will help them become a lot more resilient in the digital future. And we double-clicked on this to see, in that cloud, in that security investments, how are you using modern technologies? We looked at automation and orchestration. We looked at modern processes such as DevOps and agile application development strategies, and also using this programmable or software-defined everything infrastructure. And we saw that more than 50% of organizations are either extensively using it or definitely starting to use it in production environments. And we've crossed that 50% mark here as well, right? So all these modern technologies and components are beginning to yield results, and companies are using those a lot more. Now, if you look at software innovation, how is that driven by applications? So we predict that by 2023, 1 in 4 large European organizations will become a software producer to digitally transform themselves to remain relevant. And we're already beginning to see how a lot of organizations have these digital twin environments or digital factories set up in there to just ensure that they remain relevant and they're able to combat all these new pressures that's coming in from, say, fintechs, if they're financial services organizations. So it's becoming a software producer is at the core of what they are trying to do through applications. And we are also going to see a lot of cloud native applications. So we're going to see an application onslaught. So by 2024, production grade cloud native applications will grow to 70% from just 10% in 2020. So this is a huge onslaught, and that represents a huge paradigm shift as well. And when we're talking about cloud native applications, at 70%, we're not just talking about composite applications or logical applications that are stateless, but we're also talking about production grade core applications that will become cloud native. So that's a big game changer for a lot of organizations, because there are so many, it's going to overthrow a lot of their existing infrastructure, process, and management strategies. So it's a big thing that they need to start planning for already. And then we are also beginning to see a change in culture and how they're organizing their processes. So by 2025, 40% of organizations will have re-engineered and shifted to this collaborative and DevOps and developer led digital transformation. So they're going to empower their developer teams a lot more to make sure that they have the ability to scale their innovation. And this kind of software-driven innovation is bringing a lot of changes in the infrastructure environment as well. We're beginning to see containers entering mainstream. So a couple of years ago, there were probably 10% of applications running on container environment, and most of them were ephemeral, really. But now containers are very much a mainstream conversation. So when we talk to organizations, we realize that 7 in 10 of them are running more than 10% of their applications successfully on this container environment. And some of them are running more than 50% even in their container environment. But what's intriguing in this graphic is also the don't knows. There are 12% of organizations that say, we don't know what percentage of applications are actually running on containers. And that's an interesting one, because when we talk to CIOs, oftentimes they're very surprised to see how many more applications are running on containers, how many more databases are connected to containers. And that kind of wakes them up to take this environment a lot more seriously, to wrap it around with the right security, reliability, and stability features to make sure that their business operations and business continuity is not interrupted. So it's very important to consider that as well. But Alex, I know we had a lot of discussions about containers entering mainstream, and I was wondering, does this chart speak to you? And what do you make of it? Does it resonate with you?
No, absolutely. I think that this is something we're seeing, you know, in the community and in the customers that we're working with across, you know, across almost every vertical, right? Whether it's financial services or retail or service providers or telco or media companies. And what we're kind of seeing is, you know, this shift where the bulk, depending on, you know, which statistic you look at, up to sort of 95% of new applications tend to be developed with containers in some form, and we kind of see this journey that that our customers and organizations and enterprises everywhere seem to be adopting, where they kind of move away from applications being server bound or you know, VM bound, to containers, primarily because containers are so make it so much easier to test, to automate, and ultimately to make the application portable. And then, of course, once the application is portable, it allows you to adopt all the rest of the cloud native technologies around that, like orchestrators, such as Kubernetes, for example, which effectively give developers a massive superpower, because now developers and DevOps teams have the ability to compose what their applications need out of the infrastructure. So they can define not just the containers that need to be run, but they can also define memory, CPU, and networking, and even storage requirements. And this gives developers the capability of effectively abstracting away the complexity that they find in the infrastructure, whilst making use of a lot of the advantages in orchestration to allow applications to scale and automatically fail over and heal themselves, and connectivity issues, etc. So the draw to containers is therefore extremely high, because of all of the sort of advantages that you get, and you kind of also move away from all of the complexities that many enterprises struggle with in terms of managing individual servers. So we, in the CNCF and in the cloud native world, we have this concept of pets versus cattle, where individual servers are individually configured and set up, and sometimes depending on the level of maturity in an org, you might have config management and various other things that help with that, but ultimately it does make application management and security patching and all of those operating system patches, etc., really complicated. Whereas in a cloud native world, containers provide developers the ability to move their applications around, to rebuild environments. And because everything is templatable and composable, and the orchestrator kind of takes care of that, you get the same user experience and the same configuration files, whether you're deploying on a laptop, whether you're deploying on-prem on big dedicated bare metal servers, or virtualized environments, or cloud environments, anywhere, right? And I think that's the draw. So what we certainly see is there's a huge bias between existing apps and new applications, where the bulk of new applications tend to be focusing on containers nowadays, and the existing applications are going through some sort of transformation process over time.
Exactly. Fantastic. I think you made some very interesting points, especially that point about pets and cattle. I mean, if you're going to treat every server as a snowflake, then the management overheads are going to be super high, and that's what has happened in the last few years as well, right? And I really like that point about developers getting that superpower, because I was talking to, I think, a bank. This was just few months ago, and they said it used to take them 9 months to stand up a server, because right from getting that process of putting in an application, and not just the technology part, but also the whole process. And they said now we can move from ideas to production in 48 hours with the container environment. And that was a huge change, right? I mean, 9 months versus 48 hours. So I think empowering the developer team and giving them those superpowers is extremely important. So
no, indeed, and it's it goes in my view. We also see sort of there's a final journey on that arc, which is it goes beyond the individual application, and it becomes the orchestration of services, because once a developer can template their environment, whether it's a database, a message queue, or any type of service, indeed, you can now build a database as a service, a CI/CD as a service, and be able to spin up environments on demand effectively, right? You're no longer tied to having to set up a bespoke config per service.
Fantastic. So moving things at scale. That takes us nicely to our first discussion point, Alex, which is, we saw that digital future is very much driven by cloud and cloud native environments and containers, but they definitely represent a paradigm shift. It's a new world. How you work with containers is very different from how you work with VMs. So what are the roadblocks in this cloud first and modern application strategy? So before I hand over to you, I just wanted to share a couple of more statistics that we saw, or stats that we saw from our survey. So, 80% of organizations are using DevOps and modern development strategies. We're beginning to see that only 10% are able to take that to scale and actually show KPIs and show accelerated performance. And when we look under the hood to see what's actually holding back progress, why are they not able to scale or benefit from these kind of DevOps strategies? A lot of it is to do with legacy infrastructure and the legacy processes. So 72% of them said that integration into legacy application environment was one of the biggest factors that was holding them back. Then some of them also cited the lack of standardization and consistency, which comes up again and again in conversation. It's just so complex, and there are so many different tools that organizations can use, and it just ends up as multiple silos where there is no standardization. And when you don't have a consistent standardized environment, you cannot do a lot of other things like apply a blanket policy based security strategy or have some kind of unified visibility into what is where so that you can take the right decisions. So that standardization is becoming extremely critical. And then companies are also talking about quality of data and insights where they just don't have any visibility, which goes back to that slide where we showed 12% don't even know what applications are running in their container environment. So having that visibility and observability and monitoring capabilities across their infrastructure and application is very, very important for them. And of course, security, compliance, and governance, no conversation is complete without that. But what was interesting is that in every survey that IDC does, security, compliance, and governance is always cited as the topmost priority or challenge or requirement or investment area. So it was very interesting to see that in this accelerated application delivery survey, it was actually the integration with legacy environments and 3 other things that were cited ahead of security, which means they're really beginning to feel that pinch as they take this to scale, as they take their production environments into this container native world. Does that resonate with you as well, Alex?
Yes, it does. I think these are very common concerns, especially as organizations cycle through a maturity model in cloud native, right? Because I kind of call this the infrastructure dilemma, right? We have this challenge where the infrastructure and the orchestration mechanisms, they're key to the availability and the performance and the robustness of your environment, right? And the security of your environment. But they're having to be now paired with the cloud native demands that developers and DevOps teams, but also and enterprises are demanding as well, right? Which is basically this kind of concept where you want the on-off consumption model from the cloud, you want the self-service, you want automation for application deployment, but you also want automation for operations, and of course a lot of these modern applications need to support scale, which previously wasn't necessarily seen in some of these environments, right? So I think you kind of have this move from server centric environments to application centric environments, and I think when looking at some of the survey results in terms of what's holding back progress, I mean, we certainly see, like we discussed about how lots of new applications are moving into these cloud native environments, and some of the traditional applications are being moved, but they're going through a process. And I think integrating the 2 environments is key when it comes to environment standardization. I think this is almost it's an upside and it's a downside, honestly. I think we went through a couple of years where we had almost too many cloud native options in terms of, you know, orchestrators and ways of doing things. But I think now, you know, what we're seeing is the standardization on Kubernetes, and, you know, the standardization on, say, opinionated Kubernetes distributions, both in terms of, you know, what's being provided by cloud services, you know, like AKS from Azure and GKE and EKS from AWS, but also, you know, the higher level distributions on top that, you know, include services like service meshes, etc. You know, I'm talking about things like Anthos and EKS Anywhere, for example, as well as, of course, you know, the other distributions from, you know, vendors like Red Hat OpenShift and Rancher, for example. And so what I think is, I think this is getting much better now because we have sort of standard tools for this. But the other factor here is also, you know, we talk about the database development and management, and I think this is one of those keys that ends up holding things back, because databases are very much and other stateful applications, you know, like, you know, message queues and other file systems, etc. Streaming applications like Kafka are very anchored in some of those traditional environments. And the challenge is that when you're working with an orchestrator like Kubernetes, storage isn't one of those automatic things that you get, right? You have to use some cloud native storage services, and when you use cloud native storage services, you get all of the benefits that you sort of apply to your applications, to your stateful applications, and this is kind of the key, because I think it's sort of the next step, if you wish, in that maturity, right? When enterprises adopt Kubernetes and containers, they very often deal with front-end applications or maybe things which are so-called stateless. But the reality is, you know, there is no such thing as a stateless application, right? Every application is going to persist data in databases and message queues and in files and needs to interact using those methods, right? So the point is, if you only move part of those applications, you don't benefit from the rest of the application actually being cloud native. So, you know, that hampers things like the automation and the self-service and, you know, the dynamic provisioning. So I think part of the thing that we need to look at when talking about what's holding back progress is, in fact, how we do cloud native data services and how we integrate that within the orchestrated environment. And this is specifically, you know, one of the key points between server-centric and application-centric, right? I think so many storage systems or so many traditional storage services might be focused on providing storage to an individual server or an individual operating system or an individual VM. And of course, once your application is portable and your application can move about, you need to have those expectations that your data is also portable and can move about, and your data will be accessible in different environments and different cloud instances, and whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And I think that is one of the things that's holding back the database development and management specifically, and more generally the move of stateful applications into Kubernetes.
That point about stateful apps, you just can't stress enough, right? I too believe that, you know, over time, the lines between stateless apps and stateful apps will really blur. And for all the reasons that you highlighted, right? There are databases, there are analytics, there's message queue, all these need to be stored somewhere, right? And as you say, the biggest benefit of containers is portability. But if some components are not portable, then it just doesn't serve the purpose. And then it's not a self-contained environment, right? Then that whole concept about I can run this workload anywhere I want, it just doesn't hold up. So unless... So all the
That's right. It takes us back to, you know, if you try to do stateful applications in a server-centric way in an orchestrated environment, you're back to pets versus cattle, right? It's the same thing. You're now locked into a specific mode rather than having the portability and the flexibility.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you need to, organizations need to think about containers in a completely different way. I mean, they can't, there are conversations where they're saying, how do I procure containers or what? So, you know, you need to get out of these traditional ways of buying infrastructure, and you need to think about newer ways, and you can start small, but it's just a completely different world. And that world, you need to embrace that world fully to get the benefits of it. So. Fantastic. So if we delve a little bit deeper into the data management aspects, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier anyway, but this is to show how when you're deploying containers, day one is easy. You're developing applications, using everything that's available in that Kubernetes ecosystem, but you're not, storage and data management is usually an afterthought that's dumped on the ops team. But if we're talking about empowering the developers, we're talking also about making the developers a lot more responsible for the quality of applications they develop. And as they do that, they need to start thinking about infrastructure components, particularly storage and data management right from the beginning, so that they need to, all of us need to think about the business outcomes that we want to expect. So think right, but shift left, right? So you need to shift left all the capabilities, not just the application development components, but also the operational and the quality components. So it's very important to think about this, because otherwise you end up with challenges after deploying containers, such as key challenges, right? Security, data management, integration, data integrity, and reliability. And when you face these challenges, then you have the governance teams and the operations teams coming in and saying, no, you can't scale this unless you address that problem. So you walked one step forward, but you're not taking 2 steps back. So you need to recalibrate all that and think about having those storage and persistent data elements right from the onset. So it's very important to make sure that you shift your storage left as well. And taking that app-centric view, Alex, as you previously mentioned, is extremely important. When we asked organizations what are specific data management challenges, they ranged everything from very, very technical, like we want to protect our configuration and templates, because sometimes these are ephemeral environments, right? They don't want to keep configuring it again and again. So if there is a way they can back it up or store it, then they can just pull that out and recreate it. So protecting templates was one of the key technical backup requirement or data protection requirement that came out on top. But there was also other security things like ransomware. So, you know, there was this initial notion that things like SaaS and containers are some way immune to that ransomware, because they deliver such a different user experience and they're so collaborative. They're just so different from how I have managed my infrastructure. So maybe they're not that susceptible to ransomware, but that's not true. We're beginning to see, especially in the last 1 year, ransomware is just everywhere, and these cyber attacks are getting so much more resilient, right? They look at the data protection and backup environments and they delete that first, and then they get into your production environment. So you have nowhere to go to. So unless you take into considerations all these and develop a resilient architecture, it's going to be very difficult. Alex, any thoughts on that whole data management piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the concept of the shift left, and I think, you know, this shift left is a bit of a generic term, but it you know, it started with testing and security, but it also relates to data management and data services, and then it's sort of driven by 2 things. One is the fact that, you know, these developers and DevOps teams need to work on ever more apps with a lot of CI/CD and quicker deployment, right? I mean, the fact that a development team, you know, like you mentioned, moved from a 9-month to a 48-hour sort of process, and, you know, we even have enterprises working on sort of maybe hourly updates sometimes for certain types of apps, you end up with this paradigm where developers now become responsible for defining the data services and the storage as part of that application requirement, right? So part of the challenge in all of this is, they need to be able to understand their applications. They need to understand the data services, but they also need to, the cloud native storage to be able to handle things like, the dynamic provisioning and the high availability and things like that. Because let's face it, the developers cannot and will not necessarily be able to define things like, fault domains and failovers and high availability. They're kind of assuming that that's going to be a service that's just going to be there and just going to work. And so part of this journey to shift left means that the developers and the DevOps teams get to move much quicker, but it also means they have more responsibility and they need to have a better understanding of their applications. It also means that the applications inherently use these technologies to become more portable, but therein lies, some of the other challenges, which is, you're moving away from fixed chunks of infrastructure, and this applies to security as well as data management. You no longer have those predefined choke points where you apply security policies, and you no longer have, this big black box in the data center that's providing all of your storage. It is moving to a more distributed, a more portable environment, and therefore, the focus on integrity with all of those moving parts is also a key thing that developers need to understand, because these orchestrated environments are inherently more dynamic. They have more moving parts, and nodes come and go within a cluster. And in fact, that's actually part of the reason why they're so dynamic, is because they're taking advantage of the commercial benefits of spinning things up on demand and then shutting things down, but also because it enables better security, because when you're no longer trying to figure out patching processes or whatever, you're just replacing nodes and upgrading them every 2 weeks, every 2 months, whatever your cycle is. But of course, that does impose some interesting challenges with with the storage and the data services, because actually distributed storage, maintaining that data integrity with all of that high level of change without using proprietary hardware and things like that is possibly one of the larger computer science challenges that we're figuring out.
And yeah, it's also all about developer experience, as you said, Alex, right? They're used to a certain way of working. So if you're not going to deliver the storage experience through the APIs and that whole component-based, software-defined way that they are used to working, then they're just not going to think about it, right? Because it's just an additional burden on them to relearn older ways of doing things. So they need to work in codes and scripts and infrastructure as code and that API first world.
Yeah, it's a very, in fact, that is a very common challenge in terms of the way developers think about the orchestrated systems. They kind of just assume that certain things are going to be there and they just work. And often when we're speaking to enterprises, they may be halfway through a digital transformation or halfway through a Kubernetes project before they actually realize that they have pain points with data management or data services.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit upon this, but how are modern data management strategies and how are they going to help overcome the roadblocks that we initially discussed and accelerate this whole application modernization? And that brings us to this, core application modernization. When we're talking about this cloud-first strategy and becoming cloud native, we're talking about, crushing that 50% wall and having more than 50% of applications running in that cloud cloud-like environment where cloud really becomes the operating model and not just a destination or someone else's virtual machine, right? It becomes the core operating model. You're thinking in the terms of cloud, you're operating in the terms of cloud. So we're beginning to see how core applications are also becoming a lot more cloud native. And there are multiple ways to go to the cloud, right? You can just lift and shift. There is also lift and shift plus, which is just replatforming a little bit and then optimizing the infrastructure. And then there's also refactoring and re-architecting. So there are multiple steps to go to the cloud. And some companies take the SaaS before PaaS before IaaS strategy as well to go to the cloud. But although there are so many different steps, what we're beginning to see is that there's a sweet spot, especially in step number 4 and 5, that kind of tends to be the sweet spot in that platform world where companies can still be in complete control of their data and business logic, but they're out of this infrastructure management business, and a lot of it is automated and they can empower their developers. So that's where a lot of organizations want to get to, because when you look at SaaS, it's like you lose complete control, right? It's a lot easy, but then in many ways now, because organizations want to innovate in that SaaS platform and the data in that SaaS environment, SaaS platforms are also becoming PaaS platforms, right? If you look at Salesforce, and when I talk to companies, some of them say, I'm not sure if it's entirely SaaS for me because I've added so many customizations and I'm using so much of that data. It's very much a platform for our business. So it's that platform world that's becoming the sweet spot in this for the digital native enterprises. And that is very much about having that cloud native and container environments and scaling those things and making sure that they are super reliable and enterprise grade. So any thoughts on this as well, Alex?
No, I think what we're seeing here is we've both been in the industry for a while, right? And you kind of see trends over time, and this drive to business agility is not a new challenge, right? We've been trying to make infrastructure and application management more agile, more service, more with an on-off consumption model. Starting from VMware to AWS and Heroku and OpenStack and Cloud Foundry, and finally Docker, Kubernetes, etc. And what we're seeing is that people are actually on a journey to ultimately in a cloud native world, create everything as a service, right? Whether it's an application or a service that their application uses. And I think what we're seeing here is that some organizations have taken a complete hop where new applications are going straight into a very cloud native approach, and some applications are going through a process to either convert or transform in some way over time. And I think again this process is not is never going to be instantaneous, in much the same way that you still have mainframes in certain organizations, and the move from servers to VMs and from VMs to cloud is a constant is a constant debate. But I think one of the challenges here is about how these different environments need to coexist and integrate with each other, right? Because more and more what we're seeing is the challenges of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, where people have applications in multiple locations that need to talk to each other, that need to exchange data with each other, and I think those are some of the challenges which organizations work through. But I think more and more we kind of move to this place where they're seeing cloud native as a way of sort of hopping over a couple of the steps and kind of achieving their own software as a service for their own internal applications as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think nobody's starting from a greenfield environment, right? 80% of organizations have brownfield, so that connection between their old and new is extremely important. And also, you don't necessarily need to go to a cloud to benefit from cloud native environments. You can bring those components to your existing infrastructure, or work with where you are. I mean, you don't necessarily have to change your existing cloud strategy. You can do it in your own terms, but make sure you benefit from the cloud native strategies that can actually come to you, which is
So this is a big, I think we're going to see some flux here, right? There's obviously a drive to move towards clouds, but cloud isn't necessarily a place. It's about how you deploy your services and how you manage your services, and you know things like Kubernetes, abstract away your infrastructure and allow you to do the same things in multiple locations.
super. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are beginning to realize that, and if they can sweat their existing investments, then it's a big plus for them, right? They can make progress in this cloud native world and take those applications when they want. And as you see, we're also seeing that 4% of applications are moving back on-prem, but they're not moving back permanently. This is a very dynamic world. We'll see more apps coming back, and then they're refactored and they go back up to get that business agility. So it's a very dynamic world, which is why that cloud native features and all those components becoming cloud native is very, very important, so that you can truly benefit from this dynamism.
Absolutely. And then, throw in some of the wildcards like Edge, and you have a whole new set of strategies there.
Exactly. I mean, I was having this chat yesterday, and how some companies are skipping that cloud route completely. If Edge makes a lot more sense to them, they are just having core and Edge strategy, because as you said, cloud is no longer a destination or an outcome, right? It's, if you want that kind of business agility, you go there. But if it doesn't make sense for your business, if you have a lot of sensitive data, but you also have some oil rigs on the edge and you want that cloud native features, then you should be able to just have a core and Edge strategy and still be cloud native.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Cool. So you work with a lot of organizations as well, right, Alex? And also you're part of the CNCF board, and you talk to a lot of developers. So what does good really look like? How are successful organizations aligning their data strategy with their application strategy? Any examples that come to mind?
Absolutely. So kind of squashing the assumption that the Kubernetes applications that are being modernized are stateless. I think what we're seeing is stateful applications across all natures of businesses. So just a handful of examples. We have enterprises who are tier one banks who are deploying trading settlement systems on Kubernetes in the cloud, in using on that and cloud native data services to fulfill that strategy. So on the one hand, you have something like trading applications which have high security requirements, and also the nature of the transaction systems are very low latency, but they also benefit from the scale and the automation. And these organizations have kind of used all of those benefits from the cloud native world to actually rapidly innovate and evolve those environments. And fundamentally, we touched on the fact that developers have this superpower to be able to compose and declaratively create applications within the infrastructure using orchestrators. But one of the side effects of that is that it's also incredibly easy for recovery to happen, right? Even if an entire data center or an entire cluster is lost for whatever reason, it's often much more straightforward because you have this declarative interface to actually just recreate everything from scratch. And I loved when you called the old way of doing things snowflakes, and I think that's sort of the perfect analogy, because the previous way of doing things, you had this concept of snowflake, where every server was very unique and very pretty and almost completely unrecreatable, right? And people would have panic attacks when they had to try and restore a service if they lost systems. So one of the big use cases there is better recoverability as well as the better latency and portability. We also have other use cases where, for example, people have built services like CI/CD as a service or database as a service, again using the scaling capabilities of the cloud native environments with cloud native storage. So, for example, in a CI/CD environment, we see enterprises creating and deleting tens of thousands of volumes on a daily basis, for example, and that's just simply not even remotely possible when you kind of think of sort of the old ways of doing things, where somebody would maybe issue a service request and somebody else might configure a LUN by hand or something like that, and you end up with weeks or months or days of delay. But these sort of changes now in a cloud native world actually tend to happen within seconds, and they're dynamic, and again they're recreatable. And we also sort of see retail applications and workflow applications and media applications being deployed in real life, and these are sort of all real life customers that we've worked with, and that we've developed solutions with. So I think this is it's more than sort of just finish this off with saying it's more than just aligning the data strategy with your application strategy, right? I think you're making the decision to go cloud native with your application strategy. That kind of implies, because as we said, every application stores state somewhere, it kind of implies you need to evolve your data strategy to adapt to that new world. But what we often don't talk about is all the benefits, all the additional benefits to your application strategy that brings you, like building anything as a service, being able to recreate applications that you've lost on demand, having the automation and the CI/CD, which you literally just couldn't do before. So it also enables a lot of things which perhaps you might not be thinking about, but it's worth sort of being aware of them, because those can actually be very potent drivers in the adoption strategy in many organizations.
That point is very well made, Alex. I mean, there are so many different ways to deliver data to your container environments, right? And some of them are looking at the existing DAS environments and NAS environments, or just immediate initial storage plugins. But if you look at this CI/CD pipelines, these are big monster container environments, right? There are multiple clusters of VMs, and then it's such a dynamic world that the storage, it just doesn't catch up if you use these kind of traditional environments and kind of shoehorn them into this modern environment. Then the APIs are not aligned, and you don't get all the capabilities at the right time and right speed and right scale. So it's very important to evolve that data strategy, as you rightly said. That point is very well made, Alex. Fantastic. Yeah, and when we asked organizations, when you're modernizing your data management strategies, what are the must-have attributes for you? And that whole cloud native protection, of course, security and encryption stands out front and center always. But it was very interesting to see cloud native protection and that cloud native data services come out as number 2 must-haves, which means that companies are beginning to think, which is a very good sign, right? They're beginning to think about these kind of environments. And that point about simplicity and API-driven strategies, that's also very interesting, because you don't want the developers to spend hours on scripts and codes. You just want them to hit the ground running. So the more simple the interface is, if you speak that developer language, it becomes easier for them to adopt it. And they'll probably, it becomes a best practice then, right? And if you expect a developer to change their culture, then it becomes a long-term conversation. So having that simplicity, having that same developer experience for storage is also extremely important. And that consumption model, I've highlighted that one as well because that was quite interesting. It's having that cloud-based experience, whether it's not just in scale, but also in how you pay. So making more use of that OpEx models and shutting your storage environments down when you don't need them and scaling them up when you need them. All those capabilities are extremely essential. And having that edge to core to cloud protection was also becoming a lot more important. And I mean, all those must-haves are very important, right? If you look at the granular search and restores, you don't want to do batch restores. You want to be able to search quickly and just find those little things that you really want, whether it's just configuration data, and having that integration and that rich data services, right from storage to snapshot to replication to that last mile security. So everything wrapped into one component is very, very important. And the last point I wanted to share was really around this data resilience. So what do organizations need to boost their data resilience? And we looked at mature users and all the respondents. And it's interesting to see that usually we find a big delta. If you look at automation and orchestration, we find mature cloud users much more extensively using those kind of features. But if you look at the capabilities needed to boost data resilience, it's the same across the board, which shows that the fundamental principles don't change wherever in that journey you are. So you need to start thinking from the beginning. And earlier you made a very interesting point about the incremental benefits, right? It's all when you're shifting left, it's complex, it's hard work, it's going to take time. But once you get that right, once you get the foundation right, the incremental value and the incremental benefits is going to be huge. And then, there's no stopping you. There's this speed to market is really high because you have your fundamentals right and you're not going back, you're not facing bottlenecks or from the governance teams or the operations teams. You're all working together holistically towards the same goal, that is getting more speed or accelerating your innovation. So it's very important to look at all these technology capabilities. So key takeaways is really, embrace this whole cloud native environment. At the CIO Summit last week, we had one of the CIOs stand up and say, we kind of overestimate the risk of doing all the new things and underestimate the risk of not doing anything, right? So if you're not doing anything, you're just going to be left behind. So embrace those risks and make sure that you work around them rather than just ignoring them. But there's no question of if I should do this. The question is how I should do it and how can I do it better. So it's important to look at your business outcomes and embrace this cloud native world if software driven innovation is one of the things that you want to do. And all the companies we talk to, whether they're banks or whether it's Swarovski, all organizations say that they are a software company first, right? Whatever your product is. So embrace this new world of cloud native environments. And we made this point about lines blurring between stateful and stateless applications. And when those lines are blurring, you need to take data management, reliability, security much more seriously, because that's how you deliver a robust environment, and that's how you can take it to production a lot more confidently. And it's all about having those standards and making sure that you make the right choices at the design point, because the fundamentals that you determine today are going to serve you for the next 5 to 10 years. So you need to make sure that they are standardized, they're part of that ecosystem, and they play into that industry standards that your developers are used to. And that will help you architect your digital future in a much more coherent and non-disruptive way. Any takeaways from your side, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things that we're looking here is this move to orchestrated environments. I think is inevitable, like you said, and I think the blurring between containerized applications and the traditional world is becoming very small. So effectively, what you really need to kind of look at and think about is, how you're going to manage things like availability and the data security and the data services and the portability of your data, because it will be one of the one of the first pain points that you hit in any sort of digital transformation process, and it's useful to think about it earlier on, because we now are at the stage where the maturity in the market is getting there, and there are products like on that will help you along that journey and provide that platform agnostic data services for your environment.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, data has gravity, right? If you get your data portable, if you get your security and network configurations right, you're 60% there, right? Then, because when we talk to organizations, why are your cloud native and cloud projects failing? Those are the three things that come out at the top.
Right.
Configurations as well as that whole data portability. So there is an opportunity to actually address that data portability issue. So yeah, take advantage of that. Excellent. That brings us to the formal close of the webinar. But let me see if we have any questions. I'll just stop sharing and maybe we can take some questions if there are. Cool. So one of the things is, this whole, how do we get started? So, if an organization is new to this container environment, what is the process of POCs? How quickly can they get started?
Well, I mean, that's the particularly nice thing about trying out cloud native storage from OnThat. We're actually deployed as an operator, which automates the deployment within your environment. So you can be up and running in literally a couple of minutes. We had a contest over KubeRun where we were asking people to sort of get their OnThat installed as quickly as possible, and I think the fastest was about 90 seconds. And we're actually, a platform agnostic container that can virtualize the storage in any of your environments and then give you that data portability and the dynamic provisioning and the high availability through replication and data protection, as well as encryption of data at rest and in transit using keys that only your application manage. So you kind of get the whole plethora of enterprise data services with a really simple software install, and you can try that anywhere, whether it's on your developer environment on a laptop to any cloud environment with any type of applications. And so you kind of get that through platform agnostic way of doing data services, allowing you to run any application on any Kubernetes distribution on any platform.
Fantastic. I had a question for you, Alex, as well. So, a lot of organizations are leveraging this container environment in the cloud. And there is this belief that the cloud object storage, which is a lot more cost efficient, that's good enough. Is that a conversation you have with your customers as well? I mean, what makes them look at this richer data services? At what point do they start thinking about this?
That's a very one of the things of the developers and storage and data services shifting left to the developers is the developers need to understand some of their applications. One of the things we did in the CNCF tag is actually create a white paper that kind of explains the different types of storage, whether it's object storage or volumes or databases or key value stores, etc. And the different pros and cons for the different environments. So for example, object stores are particularly good at storing vast quantities of data in an object form, in a blob, but perhaps they're not great at doing things like transactions where some sort of database or key value store might be more appropriate. So and then you have perhaps streaming applications, message queues and Kafka and things like that, which are used as a persistence layer to allow applications to talk to each other, which again are better optimized rather than using object stores. So I think you just need to kind of understand the different services. One of the key things I think that that people should be aware of is it's very easy to kind of make the wrong decisions up front. So it's very easy to to say, oh, I'll just use that cloud service, or I might just use a database as a service in a cloud provider, for example, and then end up either having functionality issues or performance issues, or perhaps even cost issues, and it's often going to be significantly cheaper, more cost effective, and better if you can actually manage your own environment. And this is sort of one of the benefits of these cloud native data services is you can now build your own database as a service. You don't have to rely on necessarily expensive services like RDS, for example, to deal with that.
You can do more with less and empower developers. That's a great note to end this conversation on, Alex. But I look forward to talking to you in the future as well. Many thanks for your participation, and thank you to our listeners as well.
Thanks, everybody.